13th, 2020 regular board meeting, our first of the year. First order of business is to do the new board member initiation with Jamie Shu, County Clerk, and new board members Erica Hill, Carol Cadu Blackwood, Paula Smith, and Shannon Kimball to be sworn in.
Okay, if you'll stand up, raise your right hand, and repeat after me. I state your name,
I, Carol Cadu Blackwood,
Paula Smith,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and the
and the
Constitution of the State of
Kansas,
Kansas,
and faithfully discharge
and
and
faithfully discharge
the duties of USD 497 board member,
the
duties of USD 497 board members.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a pen.
Okay. Congratulations again. So at this time, we will begin our board meeting with approval of the agenda, and I am going to move that we amend and approve the agenda for the January 13th, 2020 board meeting to include the updated personnel report.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. The exciting part. Report of the board president. First and foremost, I want to say congratulations, and I'm so excited for this new board members that have come on board, our new team, and I'm looking forward to all the things that we get to do, and I know you'll have a chance to speak out, but thank you for everyone who took the time to vote and bring along this amazing staff. GR is super excited to have all these wonderful, powerful women by his so, had the opportunity to go to the legislative breakfast to share the USD 497 board priorities, and I think it was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, I didn't get to stay the entire time, but I felt like the legislature heard us and are working towards that community, that sense of community, and working towards assisting us and the Chamber of Commerce, just our community as a whole. So it was great to see Paula and Erica Hill there as well. And I don't think I have much to say, but just super excited for this opportunity to work with you all. Oh, yes, Dr. Lewis was there also. I just figured you'd say that in your notes. And I would like to welcome, I knew it, Jack Binkelman, senior from Free State High School. Welcome. He is our student board member today. Jack, please feel free to comment. You are treated like a board member here. Unfortunately, you don't get to vote on board issues, but your comments from a perspective of a student is well worth it. So please feel free to share at any time.
Will do.
And at this time, we have a report of the superintendent, the amazing Dr. Lewis.
Good evening. Good evening. I too want to definitely extend my congratulations to our new and returning board members, and I look forward to working with you. They really look good up here, don't they? They really do. I'm super excited to work with all of you. Do you have any family members that came with you tonight?
Yeah, I do. I actually brought my neighborhood. I brought my dad, Steve Cadu, and my honorary chairman, Austin Turney, and my father-in-law, George Blackwood, and my mother-in-law, Marianne Blackwood, and my husband and my daughters just left for a bowling party.
Okay. I was wondering, we just got started and they already left.
I do. My wonderful husband, Jeffrey Scar, in the purple.
Okay.
And, oh, I'm sorry. I would be remiss. I'm sorry. I brought my sisters, Michelle Cadieux, Cheryl Cadieux, and my niece, Karen Middleton, and my brother, Michael Cadieux.
Awesome.
Sorry. There's so many out there.
I brought my 3 kids, or they brought themselves. Joseph Ione, Alicia and Winona Ione.
Wave.
They're very shy.
My spouse is at home holding down the fort with the kids, but I did mention to my oldest that he should turn on the YouTube channel so he could watch the swearing in tonight. So we'll see if he did.
He's watching. I'm sure he's
Yes. Hello, Ian, if you're watching.
Thank you. It definitely is wonderful to have 2 former board members in the audience tonight. One was already mentioned, Carrie Altenburn. Wave, there you go. And Austin Turney. Thank you so much for your many years of service to Lawrence Public Schools. I have a few comments. One of the things, I shared a video last week, again, asking for the community's support around gun safety. Many of you heard, we learned last week doing the investigation at Lawrence High that a student did bring a gun to school, and he did bring it from a family member's home. He reported that he carried it for protection from persons outside of our school community. And when I talked to this student, the student was really genuinely concerned for their safety. And the student did state that he did not have any intent to harm anyone in the school, but because of an incident that happened over the holiday break, he felt the need to make the decision to bring a weapon to protect himself. These are similar circumstances that happened last year when 2 weapons were found at Lawrence High. Very similar cases. The district and all of our schools continue to work tirelessly on safe and supportive schools. These are things that we have initiatives and action steps regarding safe and supportive schools outlined in our strategic plan. And these include building relationships with students and having open lines of communication with our students. And I will tell you that our efforts that we're really taking forward at our buildings regarding those open lines of communication and making sure that we're building those relationships, students are feeling more comfortable reporting these things, and that's good. That's the goal. We want them to feel comfortable reporting these things. And there again, the most recent one was thanks to a student tip. So when we think about that, our schools are doing their part, and I will tell you, it's difficult work to maintain. Definitely, we have 2 large high schools for the adults to kind of maintain a connection with all of those students. So we feel like we're doing our part because more and more students are beginning to feel comfortable going to an adult to tell them about these things. You often hear me say that schools can't do this alone, and typically I'm talking about the academic piece of our scholars, I'm talking about the social emotional supports of our scholars, but I'm also talking about school safety. When it comes to school safety, we cannot solve this problem alone. And so the safety of all of our children are all of our responsibility and definitely require ongoing community support and community conversation and collaboration. So this coming Thursday, put it on your calendars, this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. in the Lawrence High School Commons area, student leaders at Lawrence High School, they're planning a series of, and this is just the first one, a series of upcoming opportunities to hear student voices around gun safety. You know, we often, share things as adults, but it's hugely important and vital that we listen to our scholars. And so they will share their reality, what they live each and every day. They will share that this coming Thursday. And like I said, this is the first of many planned events. These conversations have to be continuous. So like I said, the first one will be this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. and we'll have a blast of information to go out on tomorrow. On December the 19th, President Trump signed a bill to initiate Tobacco 21 on the federal level. We do understand that the Lawrence City Commission will reconsider T21, and also we understand they did add it to their legislative priorities. We also learned last week that the governor had issued an executive reorganization order to create the Kansas Department of Human Services. And this brings together the Department of Children and Families, which is formerly SRS, the Department of Aging and Disability Services, and the Juvenile Services Division. The merger is meant to better serve families through intergovernmental and community collaboration. We're pleased last Tuesday to hear from the Commissioner of Education. Chad Aberly is a science teacher over at West Middle School. He was selected for the Kansas Horizon Award winner, as the Kansas Horizon Award winner. And he's only in his second year of teaching and is making a difference already at West by building those strong relationships with students and their families and engaging students in rigorous and relevant science instruction. So congratulations again to Chad over at West. I'm looking forward to starting monthly meetings with the city manager and county commissioner, the county administrator, to discuss just topics that we all have in common. I often said when I first arrived, we cannot work in silos. We are one community, and it's important that we talk. We can't close our doors and think we can do the work of this community alone. And so we will, I'm really excited about having those monthly meetings with the city manager and the county administrator. Boys and Girls Club of Lawrence will honor 3 of our students, Okasua Danso and Ali Martinez at Free State, and Clay Lapierre of Lawrence High School at its annual Youth of the Year event on Thursday, January the 30th at 7 p.m. at Liberty Hall. The reception begins at 6, and this event is open to the public. Just a reminder, our schools and offices will be closed on January the 20th in honor of ML King Day. Speaking of ML King Day, we invite the board, as well as the public, to join us for our annual One Dream MLK celebration on Thursday, January the 23rd at Billy Mills Middle School. The gallery opens at 5:30 with interactive exhibits. The recognition program begins at 6:30 in the auditorium. Students, staff, and community members will be honored. Thank you to Melissa for offering our welcoming remarks, and congratulations to Erica, who is a finalist for the MLK Champion of Equity Award. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. At this time, we will have patron commentary. Do we have any more, Julie? Okay, just the one. Okay, so at this time, I will ask Topher to come up, and while you're coming up, I'm going to read the audience participation form. USD 497 Board of Education welcomes patron comments and thanks you for taking the time to talk to us about our policies and procedures. We set aside this time during our regular meetings to hear from the public. This is your time to share your opinions. However, complaints about specific staff or students will be heard by the board in executive session in order to protect the privacy of the individuals to be discussed. While you are not required to share your contact information, we ask for that information so that district staff or the board can follow up with any specific concerns you may have. The board, did we read that too? Yes. The board president will invite comments on topics not included on the agenda at the beginning of each meeting. Comments relating to agenda items are welcomed after the board has had the opportunity to discuss the topics. Please limit comments to 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome new members. I wanted to speak on new beginnings. It dawned on me as I was sitting out there, I was in a similarly full room, morning and ending, when I first came to a board meeting. It feels nice to be able to be back here in a full room celebrating a new beginning. You know, I think that oftentimes in our engagements in civil discourse, we tend to come to it from a place of frustration. I know myself and a lot of other people were coming to it from a place where we didn't understand what was going on. We had questions we felt couldn't get answered or weren't being answered. You know, I know we have new members. I want to speak to the whole board, though. I really have appreciated the chances that we've been given to voice. Recently at Pinckney, we have been able to engage in a process of interviewing new hires for, later you're going to have the vote, or have you already had the?
Later.
Already had the vote or later?
No, later.
Later, okay. We all will be voting on our potential new beginning, a new principle, something that we look forward to being able to move toward. And this is a poem I've been wanting to share with y'all for a while, but it never quite fit. I also wanted to do it after Julie Boyle had called everyone to cancel something because of snow, because it starts off talking about snow melts. And so it worked out perfect, Julie, wherever you're at. But yeah, just, my hope is that in these things we can understand where we're coming from, how much we care, how much that can sometimes make it difficult to communicate, and to be able to get what you want, because so often we are focused on our outcomes. And I just want to, again, appreciate the board and the district for the process by which they have allowed us to be a part of, so that we could come to the outcome that is best for everyone, maybe not always for us individually. This is the first poem I ever read in front of strangers. I read it at my grandmother's funeral, so I call it Graham's Last Dance. I wrote it while learning about how important it is sometimes to be in the wrong place at the right time. Snows melt, grass is green, winter's come and gone, it seemed. So quickly I'd seek to glean truth before my times at end. See monuments to greatness built on ground transitory as silt, ever flow and never still, just made to slow while waters bend. Earthly desires consume us all. In life springs hope, not the fall. For then we see mortality call all life to rebirth again. 'Tis painful fall to ground for leaf. Bare branches cry a plaintive grief, though their pain brings a new relief. Their death allows a new ascent, new glories born from strife, blessed growth from sacrifice. It takes us pain to eschew life, but all is beautiful in mend. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. At this time, we will have board commentary.
I just have a couple things real quick. Topher, I just wanted to say, I just want to thank you for continuing to be here and continuing to share your gifts and talents with us. It's actually something I look forward to, for you to come and share with us, so I wanted to say that. I also want to welcome Paula and Erica and Carol. It's good to have you here. I did tell Erica and Carol that I do offer free tech support for their laptops, should they need it. Paul, you're stuck with Shannon, so good luck. And then the last thing I wanted to say for our three new members, if you didn't know, I did do a quick check of my phone on the email invitation, but this Friday at 10 o'clock, we're going to do a tour of Phase 2 at Lawrence High School. From 10 to 11:30, we're going to meet in the office of Lawrence High School. And so you are more than welcome to come and check out Phase 2, and because we're getting ready to turn that over in the second week of February. So it's made a lot of progress, and it looks really nice. And so you are welcome to come and participate in that tour if you'd like to. That's what I have.
Wear pants.
Closed-toed shoes, and you might have to wear a hard hat.
Yeah,
Depending on where
I
we
don't think we have occupancy yet, so, yeah, long pants, closed-toed shoes. If you don't have a hard hat and a yellow vest, we'll provide one for you.
Okay, thank you.
Shannon?
I just wanted to say thank you to the community for giving me an opportunity to continue doing this work. I'm very grateful, and I will work very hard to do the work that needs to be done for our district. I wanted to share just a few things that have been going on since our December meeting. Had an opportunity to meet with the Deerfield Site Council. I'm the Site Council liaison for that Site Council. That was right after our last board meeting, and answered questions about a number of things that they had questions about regarding the district. Also heard a presentation from some representatives with the Safe Routes for School Planning Committee. They are ramping up to start doing more survey work again and revise and update the Safe Routes to School plan. So that is something that our school communities should be on the lookout for. We had a board lunch in mid-December at the College and Career Center, and I just want to thank Patrick Kelly and the College and Career Center staff and students who were there. It was fantastic. It was such a wonderful opportunity to share and hear from students, and we had the wonderful opportunity to have lunch prepared by our culinary arts students, which was delightful. That same day, I also had the opportunity to present our recently adopted legislative priorities to the Educate Lawrence group. I want to thank all the members of that group for continuing to be engaged. We definitely need your voices to help us amplify the advocacy work that needs to be done on behalf of our district. Kelly and I had a policy committee last Monday, and the items that we talked about in that meeting are actually on our consent agenda this evening for first reading for the board. We had a town hall meeting with our legislative delegation, in addition to doing the chamber breakfast, which kudos to Melissa. She did a fantastic job of presenting our legislative priorities to all the attendees at that meeting and to the legislators, so thank you. We also had the opportunity to sit down with the delegation for about half an hour and answer some questions about a number of different things, particularly about the items that we're going to talk about tonight, the at-risk audit and some of the questions that has raised. So I appreciate their continued engagement in allowing us an opportunity to share with them. And then finally, I had the chance to speak to the Noon Rotary Club today and did a presentation on the district's strategic plan and our ongoing facilities work, and the theme kind of being community planning and investment in Lawrence Public Schools. And I thank them for the opportunity to share all the great work that we are doing in our district with such a large group of people. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I think Jack?
I wanted to use this moment real quick. I know they'll be talking about this at LHS on Thursday, but earlier when Dr. Lewis talked about the incident at LHS, it kind of reminded me of a couple ones that happened when I was a sophomore. I'm a senior now at Free State, so 2 years ago. And I just thought, here's an interesting perspective on what happened then from a student, is that year, there were quite a few threats and scares. I remember the homecoming football game, somebody had made a threat about it related to gun violence on social media. And then, so a lot of people were worried. I still went to the, they said there would be an increased police presence. And then so that was fine. They had that under control. But then there were a few more threats that year. And that was also the year of Parkland. And I remember one of the threats, they found there was no gun. Turns out some people were in the bathroom talking about water guns. But then there was one where a student had actually brought a weapon to school at Free State 2 years ago. And it was like the fourth one of the year. And just to give everyone a perspective on how common the threat of gun violence was at schools that year, was that we were so desensitized to it by the actual time a weapon was brought. I remember it was a Wednesday when there was the false threat about a water gun, and that a lot of people were freaking out. Parents were calling them out. They had lunch on lockdown. I went to Sprouts for lunch that day, and then when we came back, they had to like ask for your name because they were trying to find some, I don't know, it was definitely secure, and like the area was tense. But then I remember the time after that when an actual gun was brought, everyone just passed it off. It was like, oh, this is normal now. So, yeah, to be a student in this time where schools seem under threat is definitely scary to the point where it desensitizes you. So I just wanted to share that perspective so all the adults in the room could kind of understand, because this is definitely a different time that I'm growing up in schools than when you guys grew up with the threat of gun violence. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I really appreciate that perspective. Any other board members?
I just wanted to, first, it's hard to switch gears after hearing that. So I appreciate that you brought that perspective to the board. And one of the amendments we wanted to make to the legislative priorities is related. We bring that up at when do we make that recommendation?
That's next.
That's next?
That's next
Okay,
after
thank you. I just wanted to make
approval.
sure. And then to my new board members, I'm just extending another welcome, as GR did. And I'm just really delighted that you're all here. I look forward to hearing your voices and your perspective, and know that we are going to be a strong board and work well together. So thank you for stepping up. I appreciate it. And I wanted to share that I attended the negotiations meeting this week, and it is still moving along well. We are right now looking at issues related to specials teachers, and hoping to find some space within the contract or within the policy umbrella to increase opportunities for them for transitions between classes. So that's one of the things we're working on, and hopefully we can get that put together for them soon. And then moving on to new initiatives and issues coming up at the next negotiation meetings to my colleagues that we're working. That's what we'll be doing. Okay, thank you.
No, we're good? Okay. At this time, we will have approval of the, retirements.
So we have some retirements that sorry, go ahead.
Approval of the agenda first. We're going to approve the consent agenda. May I get a motion?
I move that the Board of Education adopt the items listed on the consent agenda.
Second.
Do we have a second? Second. Carol Kadu Blackwood?
Yeah, I second.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yes.
GR?
Yes.
Hill?
Yes.
Kimball?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
I figured we can't do the retirements without the approval.
Yes. Yeah, so we wanted to acknowledge 7 retirements tonight. Many thank yous to Kryn Bowman for 33 years of service to our district, to Stanley Franz for 32 years, for Amy Hendricks for 28 years, Anthony Mers for 29, and Kimberly O'Brien for 20 years. We appreciate your dedication to our students and to our district. Oh, Melissa's helping me out tonight. Kind of a team.
It's been
Yeah.
since last year.
Yeah, it's been since last year. And then 2 more that I missed, and I apologize. Carol Coden for 38 years and Michael Harris for 11 years. Thank you as well.
Thank you. So as Shannon mentioned, we have the 2020 legislative priority up for revision. And at this time, I would like Shannon, board member on the policy committee, to kind of speak to that.
Thank you. Since we approved our legislative priorities at our December 9th meeting, there have been a couple of additional items come up. One related to the firearm incident at Lawrence High School, the first day back from break. So we're proposing to add the language about gun violence, how in incidents of gun violence on school grounds, 78% of shooters under the age of 18 obtain their guns from their own home, a relative's home, or from friends, and therefore the board is encouraging the legislature to implement child access prevention laws in Kansas to decrease the number of gun-related incidents and to allow for holding adults responsible for safe storage of firearms instead of the minors involved in those incidents. I think it's really important, particularly given the facts that we know around the incidents that have occurred in our district, that we advocate around this and share that information with legislators to let them know how that they can help us to keep our schools safer. As, I've been very encouraged by Dr. Lewis's public advocacy on this, that this is a community issue. It's not just a school district issue, and we need the community's help. We need our legislators' help to make progress in this area. And then the second item on here that we're asking that the board add to our legislative priorities actually did not come up until after the December 9th meeting. After that meeting, the Legislative Post Audit Division released an audit of pre-K through 12 at-risk funding. And some of the findings in that audit are concerning. It doesn't really recognize the reality of educating at-risk students in our classrooms. And there is some fear that those audit results, which really don't recognize the multi-tiered systems of support that we have in place in classrooms, the fact that classroom educators, a general education teacher is responsible not only for the kind of the first dose of teaching to a student, but also providing supports, those second and tier 2 and tier 3 supports to students, for particularly at-risk students in the classroom. And one of the findings that audit made was that districts are inappropriately spending at-risk funds on classroom teacher salaries. And that is very concerning. That's just a misunderstanding, really, of how we educate students. So would like to add some language around maintaining local district control with guidance from the Kansas Department of Education on how to spend those at-risk dollars, which is really, it's an issue of local control. It's also an issue of KSDE being the entity that has the professional expertise to advise districts on best practices in this area, rather than having the legislature try to tell us what programs or how we should be spending those funds.
I agree. As a classroom teacher, seeing that and knowing the wide range of students that I serve and teach, and how we can use those resources to kind of help and assist in a way that is best for us, and that kind of goes along with that equal is not equitable. What one district or what one school may need may vary.
And I think importantly, some of the audit findings that have been lost in the discussion have to do with how, of the 20 districts audited, the auditors found that districts spent more money on providing at-risk services than they were actually getting from the state. So then to go in and criticize how some of those dollars were spent on classroom teachers seems short-sighted at best. And so, I think that there's just a lot of room for advocacy from districts on this issue with our legislators.
Comments?
I just want to point out, and to switch back to the CAP laws or the child access prevention laws, that this would be in addition to the recommendation from the board for the red flag laws, as well as we begin to advocate for comprehensive laws that protect the community in a way that we just haven't had to face before. Like the student was mentioning, in your world, it's different than our experiences growing up. So to continue to look at ways that we can get support from the legislature to make sure that our students are safe as it relates to gun violence. So I really appreciate this addition to the legislative priorities as being significant and important, particularly in our community and every community.
I was thinking about that as well, and sometimes you shouldn't read certain things, and just realizing, like, people want to talk about, their rights to have a weapon, Second Amendment, but we're talking about, the potential to put away weapons for a period of time, because of a at-risk escalated event, and due to whether it's domestic violence, whether there are suicidal ideations, to remove it. I mean, when that happens and there's a threat assessment done, they ask you to take all sharp items and, remove it. So it's about your loved one, not, putting a restriction. It's being proactive rather than reactive. So I hope people look at it that way, you know.
Well, if there aren't further questions, I'll make the motion. I move that the Board of Education approve the 2020 legislative priorities, including the additional edits as outlined.
Second. Jones?
Yes.
Kadu Blackwood?
Yes.
Gordon Ross?
Yes.
Hill? Kimball?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. At this time, we will have Lawrence Branch NAACP History Committee Community Remembrance Project Coalition come up and report with Ursula Minor, President of the Lawrence Branch, and Carrie Altenburn, Chair of the Branch's History Committee.
Good evening, Dr. Lewis, school board members, and community. My name is Ursula Minor. I'm president of the Lawrence Branch NAACP. The mission of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons. In February 2019, our branch had a strategic planning session to discuss on what the key things we would do for the year. The work of the NAACP is done through standing committees. The three committees that are doing the work right now are the Community Coordination History Committee, Education, and Political Action. The History Committee is working on a project that happened in Lawrence history but left in the past. The project will need community support as there are many milestones that need to be accomplished. Each committee was tasked with creating a mission statement. The mission of the Lawrence Douglas County NAACP History Committee is to develop and disseminate a more just and historically accurate narrative of history of racial relations in our area to continue the community's efforts to address current racial issues and facilitate reconciliation. The chair of our History Committee is Carrie Altenburn.
Before I get started, I'd like to congratulate the new board members in the hardest job we'll ever have that has no salary attached to it. Not long after midnight, on the morning of June 10th, 1882, a large mob of Lawrence citizens descended on the Douglas County Jail. Locked up in the jail were three black men, Isaac King, George Robertson, and Pete Vinegar. King and Robertson were charged with the murder of a white man, but Pete Vinegar was not charged with anything. The mob broke into the jail and pulled King, Robertson, and Vinegar from their cells and dragged them to the center of the Kansas River Bridge. The three men had nooses put around their necks. The other ends of the ropes were tied to the bridge's iron trusses, and the men were dropped off the bridge to hang. Their lifeless bodies were left to hang there until after daylight came, when they were taken down and eventually buried in unmarked graves in Potter's Field in Oak Hill Cemetery. On April 26, 2008, the Equal Justice Initiative opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. The memorial is composed of over 800 hanging columns, one for each of the counties in the United States where a racial terror lynching occurred between 1877 and 1950. The names of the lynched in each of those counties are etched into the county's column. Douglas County is represented by one of these columns. On the grounds outside the memorial building lie duplicate copies of each of the etched columns. The EJI is developing a program where local communities will soon be able to claim their county's monument and have it shipped at no charge to their county to be installed there. The EJI has another program already in operation to create metal two-sided history markers that can be requested by local communities to be placed at the site of lynchings. Once approved by the EJI, they have the markers produced and shipped at no cost to the communities for installation there. A third project at the EJI is the collection of soil from the site of lynchings to be kept in glass jars one for each lynching victim, with the name of the victim recorded on the jar, to be kept by local communities or sent to the EJI's Legacy Museum, also in Montgomery. The EJI requires that community remembrance project coalitions be formed in each of the counties where the terror lynchings occurred to serve as the official body requesting markers and monuments, organizing their local activities, work with the EJI to cooperatively write the text for markers, and to request monuments when they become available. Community Remembrance Projects coalitions complete the historical marker proposal of interest, review and conduct research about county lynching victims, craft the marker language with the EJI, identify site or sites for installation, secure necessary permits and approval, plan a historical marker dedication and unveiling ceremony, hold a high school racial justice essay competition, and install markers and hold dedication and unveiling ceremonies. Coalition members commit to authenticity, prioritize the voices of those closest to the individuals being memorialized, forthrightness, share any information that is relevant to the work, collaboration, your strength becomes mine and mine becomes yours, listening with respect, pay attention to what is and is not being said, empowered courtesy, courteously act and speak from a place of goodwill towards others. Community members assist with connecting community remembrance projects to pre-existing or broader community concerns, planning a culturally relevant dedication and unveiling ceremony, promoting a public high school essay scholarship competition, inviting community members to the dedication and unveiling ceremony, and inviting journalists and the press to the ceremony and events. Local action. In 2008, unbeknownst to each other, a group of different people in Lawrence and the community all knew about the potential to have the marker and monument brought to the community here, and were working independently of each other towards that goal with various stages of success. And in 2009, the NAACP History Committee was formed at the goal-setting session, as Ursula said. We immediately began working towards doing what was required to become a partner with the Equal Justice Initiative in order to get the marker and the monuments. We are organizing the Lawrence Douglas County Community Remembrance Project Coalition. Current members of the coalition, the Langston Hughes Center, Douglas County Historical Society, Friends of Oak Hill Cemetery, the Blackjack Battlefield Trust, St. Luke AME Church, Lawrence Public Library, Lawrence Branch NAACP, the City of Lawrence, the Sunrise Movement Lawrence, Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lawrence, Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, and Douglas County, Kansas. We also have several others that are in the works right now. Known and potential, I'm not getting the hang of this. Potential additional members to the coalition. School districts such as USD 497, churches and other religious organizations, businesses, service organizations, governments, including the city and county, which we have already been successful, universities, KU, Haskell, Baker, libraries, historical societies, and other entities to ensure a broad-based public involvement and support. That is something that is required by the EJI and something that we would have done even if it hadn't been required. The known and potential expenses and responsible partners. The creation of markers and monument is totally funded by the EJI, as is the shipping of the marker and the monument. The installation of the marker and monument, actual cost is unknown, but likely to be $1,000 or less, is the local coalition's responsibility. The $6,000 cash award for the essay contest is being paid for by the EJI. Events leading up to the ceremony, dedication ceremony, and events following the dedication are the local coalition's responsibility. and other community events and activities, including public discussions and education and soil collection, will be the responsibility of various entities, including coalition partners and other organizations in the community as they choose to participate. The potential installation sites for the Lawrence Douglas County Lynching Marker and Monument. City Hall, owned by the city. We go around City Hall, as most everybody knows. This scene here on the west side. Follow that arrow because it's an important place where that arrow is pointing to. It's pointing to this, through the trees. That stone, what appears to be a stone wall there in the center of the picture, is actually a pier, a stone pier from the original bridge from which the men were lynched. It is the only remaining part of that bridge still in existence. And it is accessible down this stairway from the Lawrence, current Lawrence Bridge. And from this, you can see directly across the river as to where the original bridge was. And the men were lynched somewhere out there in the center of that bridge. That oval is the proximate area, if we use the City Hall site, where the marker and monument would be. That's the site of the pier. There are a number of pros for having the marker at that site. I won't go through all of them tonight, but the most important one is that the stone marker, the stone pier is visible from that site once a few trees are moved. It already has lots of traffic by there, and it's going to be, well, it is a potential addition for the Lawrence Loop Trail. So there would be a lot of foot traffic and bicycle traffic along there, more than there is now. Plus, it's easily accessible. There are parking lots at the Riverfront Mall and across 6th Street. And the crosswalk at 6th Street is on demand. So it's easily crossed. Second site is the Downtown Welcome Plaza, which is also owned by the city. Here is the Downtown Plaza in relationship to the pier. There are fewer pros and, unfortunately, and some cons in this one. The main con is that you cannot see the stone pier from the bridge. Also, there's very little bicycle traffic along there and pedestrian traffic. And you can't see the river well from that site at all. Third choice is Robinson Park, which is owned by Douglas County. Everyone probably knows where this park is. It's where the Shunganunga Boulder is. It's between Massachusetts and Vermont Street at 6th Street. As a matter of fact, this is the view of Robinson Park from Vermont Street in the approximate location where the Douglas County Jail was at the time the men were taken from it. That's the location of Robinson Park in relationship to the stone pier. There are some pros of this site. It's where the jail was located. The victims were themselves taken across this land towards the bridge. It's already the site of several historic items. It's a peaceful place to sit and contemplate nature. There's good landscaping and benches, and it's also consideration to be on the Lawrence Loop Trail. However, there is almost no visibility of the stone pier from there. You have to get almost to the edge of the river to be able to see it from there. And the pedestrian crossings there none of them are on demand. You have to wait an interminable time to cross. If you've ever tried to cross there, you stand there and wait. And there's really no parking close to it. And actually, the site is difficult to access. The fourth possibility is Constant Park, which is also owned by the city. That's Constant Park in relationship to the stone pier. Pros is that there is a small parking lot along there, and parking along the 500 block of Tennessee provides some parking. There's already an existing bicycle trail along there, and it's also on consideration for being on the Lawrence Loop. And it is located near 2 historical markers. However, once again, you cannot see the stone pier from that location. And it's in the floodplain. Most of it is in the floodplain, and you cannot put anything in the floodplain, including a marker. So that limits the location to where it could be extremely much. And it is the farthest site from where the lynchings occurred. So taking all these pros and cons into consideration of all the 4 sites, we think that the most proper and the best location will be that City Hall site where you can see the marker, see from the marker and the monument the stone pier. And now comes the commercial. We are here tonight to request that the Lawrence School Board consider joining the coalition and becoming a full partner in that coalition and going further with the project. And finally, justice. Isaac King, George Robertson, and Pete Vinegar did not receive justice in 1882. They also have not received justice in the 138 years that have elapsed since they were lynched from the Kansas River Bridge. To paraphrase the famous quote attributed to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., our intent is to help bend the long arc of the moral universe a little bit more towards justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments? Go ahead, Dawn.
I first learned about this project actually this summer, kind of at the beginning of campaign season, when some representatives had a table set up at a meeting that I was at. And I am very glad that you have brought our board the opportunity to be partners in this, and I hope that we will do that. There's not a motion attached to this evening, but
It was just a form we fill out.
we don't need to vote, or we do?
No, we do not need to vote. Sorry, I'm saying yes, you're correct, we don't need to vote. Sorry.
Well, I am thankful for that opportunity. Thank you for being here.
If there's no objections, we can complete the form.
Yeah. Do we have any objections to it? Because,
I see no reason not to object. I mean, it has so much potential for education and expansion, so I support this.
Yeah, I agree.
Just want to definitely thank Ursula and Carrie for being here tonight when they met with me and shared, I guess, the commercial or the pitch. I felt the same way. As I think it also allows our scholars an opportunity to learn more about those dark days in history. And I was sharing with them, of course. Montgomery was home for me for about 18 years, and I was just down at the Equal Justice Museum in September, and having seen some of those beams. I saw the Kansas beam laid out there. But I think, like I said, it really provides an opportunity for the entire community to, first of all, acknowledge and learn from the past. And the work that Brian Stevenson is doing there with the Equal Justice Initiative is amazing. If you haven't seen Just Mercy, I saw it Saturday. It's a really good movie. But there again, I think this is something that we all as a community can get behind. And I know, and I'm thankful that the board is willing to get behind this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. May I say something?
yes.
Yes.
I appreciate you bringing that up to us. It also reminds me the history of Haskell Indian Nations University and those young children that attended the boarding school here and have also passed with no names attached to their memorials out at Haskell University. So Thank you. We do have a lot of history, not very good history here in Lawrence and Douglas County. So thank you.
Thank you, Paula. We good? Okay. At this time, we'll have Ellen Willits, Director of Technology and Federal Programs, to come up with the report from, about families in transition.
Good evening. I'm Ellen Willits. I am your state liaison for students in transition to the state of Kansas. And I'd like to begin my report this evening with about 2.5-minute video that really, I think, displays why we do what we do.
I'm not Marie Osmond.
I'm not either. And that's what makes the new personal plans from Nutrisystem such a big deal.
That only works.
Finally, tonight, it's not where you start, it's where you end up. Here's DeMarco Morgan.
Tuba player Richard White knows just how to make his deep-pitched brass instrument growl. But very few know the story behind how the Baltimore native made it to the big stage.
Some nights, unfortunately, I couldn't find my mom. So I would go in abandoned houses or find a piece of cardboard and sleep under trees.
At the age of 3, White was homeless, living on the streets of inner-city Baltimore. His mother, an alcoholic, struggled to keep a roof over their heads. This fountain was a lifeline.
And you would get water, you would also bathe here.
This is where I washed up, man. Yeah.
So it's still tough for you.
It's very real. I'm sorry.
Then, a miracle.
And I was found right down here.
Found alone in a doorway during a snowstorm. He was later adopted by Vivian and Richard McLean, who gave him more than just a home. They gave him a passion for music. He loved it so much that he applied for the Baltimore School for the Arts, run by Chris Ford.
He comes in, he had a broken hip at the time, so he's got crutches. He's got this plastic sousaphone wrapped around him.
I said, I'm here to audition. He said, oh, really? Auditions were yesterday. And I said, but I'm here now.
Something came through that was really compelling about him, that was well worth taking a chance.
White, who couldn't even read music at the time, persevered. He became the first African American to earn a doctorate in music and tuba performance and has performed for audiences all over the world. His life story has now been made into a documentary film called Raw Tuba, after his initials, Richard A. White. He continues to perform and teach at the University of New Mexico.
What would you say is the moment you said, okay, you know what, I am somebody?
The thing I'm most proud about is that every day I get to go to work and give back and make a difference in a kid's life. Because that's what happened to me.
It doesn't get more raw than that. DeMarco Morgan, CBS News, Baltimore.
Introducing new personal plans from Nutrisystem.
We're gonna restart it. There we go. Okay. I had the privilege in October to actually hear him speak, as well as his brother. His brother is now working with him. He also was homeless, obviously, addicted to drugs, and they are working now. His brother is a rapper, and they are working on a tuba rap kind of album that they're putting out. So extremely emotional, phenomenal gentleman. Okay, although, let me start again. Okay, although the federal grant refers to individuals who are without housing as homeless, We here in Lawrence Public Schools refer to them as families in transition. The federal legislation is the McKinney-Vento Act. Although we are not a McKinney-Vento grantee here in Lawrence Public Schools, we do make sure that all of our families are provided the supports that are guaranteed within this act. The three criteria that will help determine whether or not you're homeless are defined within the grant. They look, first of all, on whether or not a family lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Fixed, meaning that it is someplace that they can go to every single night. It's dependable. If it is regular, I'm staying there every single night. And is it adequate? Is it going to meet the physical and psychological needs that you would come to expect in a home? Does it have water? Does it have electricity? Does it have heat? Families who do not have those would be considered a family in transition. We look at every single situation individually, so it's not a global kind of decision, so lots of criteria pay within that as well. I'd like to share a little bit with you some of our numbers here for students that are living in transition. This chart gives you that information broken down by grade levels. The first column after those grade levels gives you the total count of students in transition in the 18-19 school year. The very last column on the right gives you the numbers of students that we have currently in December. The column to its left gives you a comparison of what we had in December of 18. So our numbers are relatively close to where we were last year. So I would expect our number to probably be somewhere around that 123. Numbers are cumulative. So if I was considered a family in transition in August, I stay within that count that we keep track of clear through May. And during that period of time, that number is just going to continue to grow. So we aren't seeing actually large numbers, but still about the same numbers we'd had. As per McKinney-Vento, we provide supports to those students, one of them being immediate enrollment. When a family arrives and identifies themselves as being in transition, we enroll the student that day or the following day. If there are any issues as far as we need to get records or if there's anything that that family needs, we will help them through the school system to be able to get those records that they need for enrollment. The most important thing that we do, I think, is maintain the consistency of the school for the students. They have a right to go back to their school of origination. Sometimes that is a transportation, sometimes among particular counties that surround us. That's extremely important. We do that even if the family becomes housed during the school year. So if they find a job and they find a permanent house, they have a right to continue in that school for the balance of the school year. Consistency of school is one thing that the students can depend upon. It's more than just K-12. We also support families who have students that would be preschool to ensure that they get enrolled in the preschool programs that are available here. And sometimes families move when students are in the high school. So if they do, we make sure that any potential partial or full credit that they have in other schools are transferred here so that they don't lose that credit in all of the movement among the schools. We help support students who might be college bound by providing them some counseling, some understanding of college readiness. We help them fill out financial reports. We help them understand that there will be some supports there at those colleges and universities. So try to be that support system leading into what they may see there. Just to kind of give you an idea of how the families are living here in Lawrence, in December, I have about 68 families in that 114 students. About half of those are living doubled up with a friend or someone else. I have about a third of them that are living in transitional housing, which would be shelters, either domestic violence, community shelter, family promise. I have about 11% that are living in a hotel or a motel, and I have 6% that are unaccompanied minors, middle school and high school students that are living typically with a friend or somebody. Couch surfing is often referred to as that. So we have them in all sorts of situations. We here in Lawrence Public Schools have a very strong support system for those families. We begin with professional development for all of our staff. There's a mandatory video that everyone watches at the beginning of the year that helps identify for those individuals kind of what does family in transition look like. We also provide some written information to further help them understand that it may identify itself in many different ways, that it won't all present itself in the same way. So teachers, bus drivers, food service, everybody has an idea, and they're all looking and watching to try and help. We also help them by providing, as I said, school stability. I have a network of support in the buildings and here at the district and in the Welcome Center that build rapport with those students. If that familiar face out in that building is somebody that I might reach out to, or that teacher notices that Ellen is sleeping more often in class or my assignments haven't come in, gives them a familiar face to approach me and for me to feel comfortable with to ask for supports. Many of those resources that we have are school-based, but we also work to make sure that they are connected out in the community with those other resources that we don't necessarily provide. That familiar face is a place that somebody can go and help to be able to feel comfortable enough to admit that they need that help and be able to access that help. One of the resources that we refer or that we have contact with is the Lawrence Community Shelter. And this evening, I have the new executive director of Lawrence Community Shelter here with me. I serve on the board out there, and I've had the privilege of beginning to work with her. So I'm going to let Renee just kind of tell you a little bit about some of the things that they do to support our students.
Thank you all very much. It's really nice to meet you, and I'm really excited to be here to share with you a little bit about our family program. Currently at Lawrence Community Shelter, we have 7 families staying with us. The ages of kids that we serve, we currently have 16 kids ranging in ages from 8 weeks to 15 years old. The majority of the kids that we serve are under the age of 5. We have 4 kids in Head Start, 2 in kindergarten, 1 in 1st grade, 1 in 3rd grade, 1 in 6th grade, and 1 in 9th grade. And then 5 kids under the age of 2. So primarily the families who live in the shelter are families with really young kids. Frequently what happens to families that render them homeless is a family breakup or we're mostly serving single mothers at this point with multiple kids who are under the age of 5. So incurring any kind of financial difficulty in that situation, or a breakup of a household where a 2-parent household becomes a 1-parent household, can render anybody homeless, so any young family homeless. So we work with families who reach out to us who are experiencing homelessness to divert them to from the shelter to find other avenues for remedying their homelessness. McKinney-Vento has a really expansive definition of homelessness. It's more expansive than HUD's definition. Typically, HUD defines if you're living doubled up or if you're living in a hotel or motel, HUD wouldn't consider you homeless. So some HUD-funded programs that are available to families, they have to be living in a shelter or living on the street to access them. So it's really important what the Department of Education does and what McKinney-Vento does to ensure that students and young kids who are experiencing homelessness get the support that they need and the services that they need to transition out of homelessness. We know that homelessness is really a public health crisis and is associated with lots of poor outcomes for kids, developmental outcomes, medical outcomes for kids who experience homelessness. So homelessness is associated with hunger, it's associated with exposure to violence. So all of the outcomes for children who experience hunger or exposure to violence, you're likely to see in kids who have a history of experiencing homelessness. So to that end, the Lawrence Public School District, I think, does a really great job working, partnering with us and working to support families in transition. I have a really great family program manager. Her name is Cheryl Sanders. And so she works really closely with principals and teachers in all of the schools that our kids attend and basically coordinates services for our kids and parents with other partner partners in the community. So some of those partners we work with are parents as teachers, the health department's Healthy Families program. Family Promise provides case management to several of our families, and we refer kids to Head Start and utilize Success by Six and a lot of those programs as partners. And Cheryl wanted me to shout out to Ellen, as well as the food service staff at the admin office and the teachers at Prairie Park, Sunset Hills, Billy Mills, Kennedy, and Kennedy for all they do for the kids who are living in our shelter. One other thing that I'm working on in this first year, my first year running the Lawrence Community Shelter, is looking at our outcomes and the data that we have on kids experiencing homelessness, and trying to develop programs that will help reduce the length of stay, their length of stay in the shelter. So when kids move from a doubled up situation or from a hotel or motel or from the street into shelter, a lot of times people think or feel that we've addressed the problem of homelessness and then it's for the shelter to, fix. But actually, when people are living in shelter, like I said earlier, they're still homeless. So it's our job as a shelter provider to do everything we can to reduce the length of time that kids experience homelessness, because expanded periods of homelessness are associated with, worse sort of developmental outcomes for kids. So right now, our average length of stay for families in the shelter is 6 months, and it's really too long. So there's a lot of housing options available for kids when they exit the shelter for families. We have Section 8 programs specifically for families experiencing homelessness. We have transitional housing programs available for kids experiencing homelessness, but it takes a long time. It can take up to 6 months for us to get our housing applications in, for vouchers to come back, and then once we have vouchers, to find rental property owners who will rent to people who own Section 8. So Section 8 discrimination is a huge problem that perpetuates family homelessness. And so one of the things I'm working on is hopefully we'll be able to partner with either the Affordable Housing Board or the city or county to create more rapid rehousing funds, which hopefully wouldn't force families to wait in the shelter for Section 8. They could transition more quickly with flexible rental assistance out of the shelter and into permanent housing. So those are some things that we're working on. Prevention is also really important to me, and so I'd like to work on developing a prevention program in the next year. For every household that we prevent from becoming homeless nationwide, communities save up to $10,000 because homelessness is really such a costly man-made problem to maintain. So I'm really excited about all the opportunity there is here, and really grateful for the partners that we have in the school district and how Ellen operates as a partner with us and how engaged she is with the shelter by serving on our board. And so if you welcome you guys to reach out to me if you want to connect and talk more about how we can partner to assist families and kids in transition. So thank you very much.
Okay, my final slide is just some additional resources that you could, if you wanted to, be able to research out additional information too. So are there questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to say, from personal experience, having been a family in transition, probably a non-traditional family in transition, it was about as smooth of a process as it could have been. And back in 2017, when we had a house fire and were living in my in-laws' house for 6 weeks, and then a rental house, and then a hotel, and then back home, it was not a pleasant experience, but everything that went into what the district does for families in transition sure made it a lot easier. And have had the opportunity at least twice since then to help other people through that process of how to do it and give them some hope in a otherwise dismal situation. 3:30 in the morning standing on a sidewalk when you're watching your house burn. There's not a lot of good news you can give them, but this is one that it's a good program. I think we do it really well.
Yeah, and I would thank Ellen for her work that she does with our 114 families that are in transition, and definitely our Lawrence Community Shelter and the many other organizations that support our families. There again, this is just a true testament of schools can't do it alone. When I think about the work that Family Promise does and the many churches that's a part of Family Promise that allows our families to reside in their churches, and the volunteers that don't get paid to stay there overnight with them. It really speaks to how this community just rallies around its citizens. And so there again, our families and our scholars are touched by that. And so if there's any member of one of those churches or any organization that supports our scholars outside of the regular school day, thank you.
Second that. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for your commitment and passion. As a longtime volunteer for the Willow, I really appreciate your work. I was fortunate enough to volunteer for the Willow for over 4 years, and I've seen your great work. So thank you.
Well, it's not all me. I have a great team
Thank
behind me
you.
out in the buildings and here at the district too. So yeah, Lawrence Public Schools works well.
Thank you again. Okay. At this time, we have Leah Wisdom, Director of Equity, Instruction, and Student Services, to give us a ESOL update.
Good evening. Leah Wisdom. I'm really excited to see new faces. Paula and we have served on committees. We also went to the alternative high school together and graduated. And Erica and I have served on some committees together and even a panel for Lawrence Memorial Hospital. And Carol, we have yet to do great things together, but I assume that we will. So welcome. It is good to see you all. I am Leah Wisdom, the Director of Equity Instruction and Student Services. I also have my esteemed colleague, Casey Van Dyke, who is the ESOL facilitator, who's going to share in this presentation with me. Stop us at any point if you have questions. We're just going to get right to it. So you may, associated with English language learner, and I talked with some of the board members who've been with us a while, maybe have seen this, but there are a lot of acronyms associated with English language learners. So just wanted to acknowledge them. And we use them interchangeably in a lot of cases, so you might hear us use these in different ways. ESL, English as a Second Language, is often the acronym that we use for programming, like our ESL students, our ESL program. ESOL, those two are kind of synonymous. ELL is often utilized when you're talking about a specific student, an English language learner. There's ELD, there's EL, there's LEP. Another newer term, not brand new, but it's newer in the last few years, is CLD, culturally and linguistically diverse, which we try and use more often. We feel like it better captures the audience of students that we're talking about and families culturally and linguistically diverse. So wanted to acknowledge all those and that you've probably seen and or heard of them, but they oftentimes are referring to the same thing. In Lawrence Public Schools, we have, didn't look like that on mine.
It doesn't look like that on here either.
Did that.
It looks
Okay.
fine.
We have 63 languages represented. We have over 40 countries in those languages. These are our top 5 Spanish outside of English. So we have 49% of our English language learners are Spanish speakers, 12% are Arabic, 6% are Chinese, 5% speak Laotian or Lao, and 2% Korean. So the other percentages, all the rest of those languages fall into these small numbers that we have, right, across the district. Want to talk for a minute about why we have we know that we need to serve students who have English as a second language, but what are the requirements from the state? Just to give you a sense of those guidelines that we're following. So when we're determining eligibility, we want to know students who come into our system, do they qualify for English as a second language services? Every single family that comes to enroll their child answers these 3 questions. What is the first language of the student? What is the first language of the parent? And what language is the primary language spoken in the home? If any of those questions are not English, it prompts us to then screen a child, a student, for potential English language services or support. So what's important to note here is that in order to qualify to receive support, it doesn't necessarily always mean that it's the student's first language that's qualifying them. It might be the parent. It might be that there's an extended family in the home where the primary language spoken is another language. Sometimes when we do this, we also then give an extended home language survey so we can get more information. And this is where we can discover other things a student has been receiving their education in another language for several years prior to coming to Lawrence or things like that. And that helps us to determine what kind of support a student might need. So once they're screened, and we screen utilizing, if you look at that first bullet, it says loss links and pre-loss. That's just a screener that we use to determine eligibility. We are actually moving to something called the IPT, which stands for the IDEA Proficiency Test. The IDEA Proficiency Test. Casey knows a lot about that. We are making that shift for a variety of reasons, one of which is that with the IPT, there's an ability to monitor progress over time, where we don't really have that with so much so with the pre-loss and the loss links. So we are making that shift. But once those students are screened and we determine that they are eligible for services, that is when a parent then is offered services. So I say, hey, your child qualifies. Do you want to accept or decline? So it's a parent's right and responsibility at that point to make a decision if they want the district to serve or to not serve. From there, whether a family accepts or declines services, if their child qualifies, we are required by the state to give an annual assessment to see what their English language proficiency growth is over time. So even if the parent says, please do not provide any services for my child, we still have to give and provide the assessment. Does that make sense? And then we have to share the scores annually with the parents so that they know, hey, your child still qualifies. Do you want to accept services now, or do you still want to decline? So this just shows you where you can get more information at ksde.org. This is ESOL Title III. This kind of shows the progression of what we do. So I want to walk us through that on the right. Once a family accepts services, we will place them into services and whatever they're at and whatever level makes sense for them, which is where an individual learning plan comes into. So what are that student's goals based on all this information that we have, right? And usually comes from assessments. But here is where I like to talk about what's different about an individual learning plan for a student who has English as a second language or qualifies for English as a second language services is that if you think about language, there's like two parts. There's input and output. So input is like you're listening to me, hopefully, or you're listening and or reading. Those are both input, or you're doing your output. You're speaking or writing. Does that make sense? So when we're creating an individual learning plan, oftentimes teachers are thinking about which one of those two areas, when we look at the data, does this student need more support in? And by support, we're talking about, could be, if it's input, it could be additional wait time, because sometimes we talk fast and we don't leave a lot of wait time, right? And when that's a strategy and a skill that we use with a lot of students. So we think about those input-output type goals when we're creating individual learning plans for all the students. Throughout the year, we're monitoring those goals. So if what we're doing isn't working, then shifts need to be made. We're assessing annually with the KELPA. This says KELPA 2. It's actually shifting to just KELPA. I'm always looking at my colleague here. It used to be KELPA, then it was KELPA 2, now it's KELPA again. And we, based on all this information, continue to provide professional learning to staff. So I'm going to dig a little deeper into some of these pieces as we move on. What is it?
Leah,
yes, thank you.
how common is it for families to decline services?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
I have the numbers for you.
You have another slide for that. So if you still have a question after I show it, absolutely. And I forgot this little pop-up here. So in the past, for a student to exit from English as a second language, they had to score proficient on that KELPA assessment, that annual once-a-year language proficiency assessment, for 2 years in a row before we could exit them. It was actually almost impossible to exit. It was very rare that we had students exit out. So it was kind of a frustrating process. Now, the current process, and there's a new assessment, is just 1 year of proficient. So when we look at our numbers a little later of how many students are qualifying and accepting, you will notice a dip. And so we'll talk about that. And it really has to do with the shift in the assessment and the shift in not having to have it, because it used to be if you had 1 year proficient and then the next year you scored just one below on any one of the 4 areas, reading, writing, listening, speaking, you started all over again on the 2 years of proficiency. They had to be consecutive. Does that make sense? So, all right, so here's where we offer English as a second language services. We do have 6 endorsed teachers in our early childhood program. At our cluster sites in elementary, which is Hillcrest and Quarterly. So students go to Hillcrest if they live in that area and qualify for English as a second language. They attend their home school, and then the whole rest of the elementary schools outside of Schwegler and Sunflower go to either Hillcrest or Quarterly. So we have 13 certified ESL teachers at the elementary level. You see the neighborhood sites, Schwegler and Sunflower, and then we offer English as a second language services at all of our middles and all of our high schools. So at the middle schools, we have 4 certified teachers, 4 paraeducators. At the high schools, 5 certified teachers and 2 paraeducators. It just gives you a sense of how it's staffed, and that is...
Is that per middle school and high school or total?
That is total.
Okay.
So the way that it's allocated is this ratio. We look at, for every 30, if you will, students who are at that site, they get 1 certified teacher, or they can split that into paraeducators. So we have been looking at shifting and adjusting that a little bit based on level of proficiency. So if you have a significantly higher number of students in your building who are new to the country, for example, that's a very different kind of support than a student who has just been in the country a long time and lacking academic language. Those are very, very different types of support. So we've been exploring that. It's a completely different way to look at allocation and funding, but we believe potentially a more effective and efficient way to serve our students. Did you have a question?
So you've explained this to me before, so I apologize that, and I also was looking at numbers, so you might have said it already. But can you talk about how teachers can be, does the district play for them to be certified?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. And I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but I'm going to address it now also.
Okay.
So at the 4 elementary schools, we require all the teachers to be certified, ESOL certified.
At the cluster sites? At the 4?
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, at those 4. I'm sorry, Hillcrest, Quarterly, Schwegler, and Sunflower.
Okay.
That's where we service for ELL.
Okay.
So at one point, we only had ESL at Hillcrest Elementary School. And it was because for years, the students who were coming to us with English as a second language were coming from parents of the university, either visiting professors or students that were here. But that population just completely changed in between 2000 and 2005. So we shifted and said, we really need all of our teachers at Hillcrest to be endorsed, and we probably need another site, because at the time, Hillcrest had upwards of 75% of their entire population was English as a second language. Although right now they're still pretty high. They're still close to 65% English as a second language. So we require all those teachers, and because we require it, we pay for it. Right now, the state only asks that if I want to be endorsed, I pay $150, I take a test, I pass it, and I add that to my license. But we feel that that's not enough, that just being able to pass a test isn't adequate. So we do pay for all of our teachers to take what's called a methods class, English as a second language methods class, which is really the introductory basic of the 4 courses that are required for an entire endorsement, but the most informative and the one our teachers find the most beneficial. So they get that. We pay for those 3 credit hours. And then the next year, they take a year-long academy, 1 night a month for 3 hours, where they get all the information from the other courses and to prepare them for the assessment. So they get strategies. We pull from the other courses of the endorsement, we like it too. But it's still not perfect, because some of our schools, like when Quarterly came on as an ESL school, they went through with K-State, I think, we let them pick from a couple different universities as an entire staff, which is a very different, again, experience than just you, Kelly, going to get your endorsement with a group of teachers that might be also new from another building, if you will. So we're still playing with how to do that, and we're going to talk about something we've taken advantage of this year and last year Project Insight, to talk a little bit more about that. Now, at middle and high school, we do not require all teachers to be endorsed. It's a very big lift financially and otherwise. We do ask that the ESL teachers obviously are required to be endorsed, and we encourage those staff to come attend the academy that I talked about that's a year long, which is free. We pay for the resources that they get, the books and things, but then it's their responsibility to take the assessment and get it on their license. So-
Okay. I think I was mostly confused because it says 13 certified ESL teachers, but there are.
Those are only the ESL resource teachers. There is definitely more. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I went way above and beyond your actual question.
No, that actually was all helpful, and yeah, thank you.
So just walking through the next few slides, this is our enrollment over time. So you see that dip, right, in 2017. We kind of progressively went up. That is a direct result of what we talked about in terms of how students are exiting. To give you a sense of that, in 2017, we had 120 plus students who exited that year with the new requirements, so having just 1 year of proficient, whereas in the past, we've literally had 15 or less. So 120 in 2017, and I think it was close to 70 in 2018. I left that sticky note. 72 in 2018. So it just gives you a sense of the massive numbers of students we have exiting. Now, when they exit, they're still going to what we call a transition year. So we're keeping track of them. We're making sure they're okay. And if we need to, we could reassess them. But usually what we're finding is they have the supports that they need. You want to?
Yeah, so
You come up here.
So for the for students on transition status, those students, we are still allowed to serve. So a lot of times what we'll find with English language learners is that the ELL teacher, not only do we meet linguistic needs, but we're also serving sociocultural needs, and we're also furthermore serving their ability to access grade level content. And so we do, especially at the secondary level, and even a bit more at the elementary now, you'll see sheltered instruction, which is where ELL teachers are adapting content to make sure it's accessible, but still maintains the rigor that we want for students. But that third component is navigating the U.S. system, the new U.S. school system, the U.S. culture. How do we start to call Lawrence home? And so when students, they may linguistically pass just fine very quickly, but then what we'll see is we like to do serve them that transition year if they're actively receiving supports. That way we can kind of help them transition and move on to a monitor status where it's just kind of us looking through a window, making sure they're doing okay.
These numbers are messed up too.
They're fine on
Yeah.
us.
They're fine on yours?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's weird. Okay. Let me see if I can pay attention to what I did here. So this just gives you a sense of the number of students that are, the number of families that are declining services at non-ESL schools, okay? So 5 at Broken Arrow, 11 at Deerfield. If you've been here a while, you'll know that these numbers are shifting. Our highest number used to be Kennedy. We had almost 50 students declining at Kennedy. Langston has always been another one where we have a high number of ELL students who are declining. A building where they really want kids, they want their kids going to their home school. They live right across the street or whatever, Prairie Park. And so that's sort of a total, not sort of, it is a total of 101 students at our elementary levels that are declining services.
Do you ask for a reason why they decline?
Mostly. We do, so we require that we do a little bit of counseling before they sign the decline letter, especially if it's a student who has really low proficiency. So, but most often the reason given is I want my child to go to their home school. Most often. That's the excuse I hear, or the reason rather, that I hear the most.
I just want to back up into that. So at Kennedy, where we have, because the difference between Langston Hughes and Kennedy is that there also is a socioeconomic difference for the families that are served there.
There is.
So the resources one might conjecture for students at Langston Hughes that a family can provide are significantly higher likely than a family at Kennedy. So just so that we're being clear, there the families at Kennedy are wanting to keep their kids in a neighborhood school as opposed to them going to Cordley, as an example, because of the distance. Is that correct? And so when they're at Kennedy, and if they have multiple risk factors, not to say that ESL in and of itself, because there's all kinds of, a kid shows up all different kinds of ways and prepared to do different things, but if they have multiple considerations and they're declining, that are risk factors, and they're declining services, how do we support Kennedy staff and instructors to ensure that the kids can have the kind of outcomes that we want them to have when they're not in a community that is supported by the types of services that like Cordley might have?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is one that we grapple with. So when our families decline, it doesn't mean, oh, sorry, we're just not going to support you in that area. There is still a responsibility on the shoulders of that building and those teachers to meet the needs. So one of the reasons behind creating Casey's role as the ESL facilitator is so that she can also support at non-ESL sites. So her priority is middle school, high school, and non-ESL elementary sites, although she does a ton of other things with leadership teams and things like that. But she will sit in regularly on, for example, this is just one example, if a student is being referred for special education, but they also have English as a second language needs, and they're at a non-ESL site, so they haven't been receiving active services, Casey will go in and sit in on those meetings and observe and help to make a well-informed decision about how to move forward for supports for that student. So in a lot of cases, we say, gosh, you're receiving a lot of support here. The teachers are doing everything they can. They're getting support from Casey, but we'd really like to see how this student could thrive in an environment where there's a plethora, where the supports are, so Hillcrest or Cordley, and we've actually then, families have accepted under those circumstances, come to a building with significantly higher supports, particularly if we believe that language is the crux of the referral for special education, because what we don't want and what happens sometimes is misidentification into special education when what we're really talking about is English as a second language, which sometimes comes out as behavior, sometimes comes out as other things.
So essentially, do you do like you know how you do the sit before you go to the referral for special education? Essentially, you do that with the non-ESL schools?
For example, there was a family over at Kennedy a year or so ago that I went up first. I started off with them at a parent-teacher conference. Then I happened to be at the next parent-teacher conference. And then when we started having more regular meetings, at that point in time, Kennedy feeds into Hillcrest, that cluster site. And so at that point in time, I called Principal Becker in. We met as a team, and we got a lot of stakeholders involved. And we're like, okay, this is something that we'd really like to see happen to help make sure your student's successful. So.
And kind of building on this question about which sites students are declining services at to remain at or where they're opting to remain at a particular building, where you see, so then when you think about the students that you are transferring out of that neighborhood, like Kennedy or some of the higher, maybe Prairie Park, how do we assess whether or not we are pulling so many kids out of the Prairie Park neighborhood that we really should consider increasing services at Prairie Park itself? I know that's a back and forth a lot, particularly when there's 14 buildings, but I'm just wondering, how do you evaluate that as a team? Are you at the right building?
So we've done that a couple different times, and it is rather arduous because there's a lot of different. There might actually be people on the board who can speak to this better than I can, because it starts to get really. So here's what I can tell you. We've looked at the numbers, and the time that I'm thinking about is when Kennedy was the highest. We had almost 50 students, 50 families that were not accepting services, and we felt like in that building, in that high number, could we consider Kennedy as potentially another site? And at the time, there was new leadership coming on board. There were a lot of reasons to think this might not be the right time to ask an entire staff to become endorsed in English as a second language. And it was actually brought to the staff, and they weren't super comfortable with doing that yet. Interestingly, now we look, and that number has shifted greatly. But
I guess what I'm wondering, the decline has shifted, but have the number of families in that neighborhood shifted?
let me
And so
get to that.
that's important too.
So when the bond came out, and this is where it starts to get a little When we look at trajectories for schools, so like Hillcrest, for example, is primarily populated with English language learners. If we were to shift that boundary, because their highest number of kids incoming is from Hillcrest, or is from Kennedy, we significantly change the future trajectory of those sites, both sites, when the bond construction, I think was, and I'm not sure about all those pieces, but I do know when we think about Hillcrest, we have to think about, and we make shifts to other schools, when decisions have been made, they've been made on the way the current structure is. So there's that. Then the second piece is the ability to then finance that next part, which is do we have the ability to upkeep another school and all the endorsements at that school? Like financially, can we do that? Because by adding another site, we don't add funding. Does that make sense? We don't.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's really we're in an interesting trade-off, because the other thing that happens is that oftentimes in that particular neighborhood, culturally, you have a group of folks from a particular, they're living by each other, and you could have a whole community built within a school like Kennedy, which has low enrollment right now. So I know it's a balancing act for you all, and Hillcrest is a beautiful school. They do excellent work. It's just something to think about when you think about kids getting in a bus and going to Hillcrest, when maybe there could be a whole community for them inside of
I think
Kennedy.
it comes up a lot, right?
Yeah.
We have this conversation a lot, and if we could, we would be servicing at every school. That would be most ideal.
Okay.
So we are always open to that discussion. The board has requested us to bring those numbers, and that is why we've explored it and brought them to the board. So we are always happy to look at that more in depth and think about what it looks like to add sites, and it takes more brains than ours, than she's in our, because those are the things we don't know about and think about, which is the trajectory of enrollment. And we just don't know those things. We just know like what we could do better for kids, and then how do all those other pieces and parts play into that, which is, so we need more heads in that, but we are happy to bring more information on that if you request it.
So thank you in advance for repeating, if you already said this already. Why are Kennedy ESL students going to Hillcrest versus Ford Lee?
I didn't do that per se, but my understanding is the way the boundary.
Leah, if you want.
Sorry.
So when the last time that we made boundary changes, so that would have been about 5 years ago, this was all part of the planning and calculus that went into the package of boundary recommendations that was made to the board, and it is a balancing act. You're looking at, okay, if you change where these cluster sites are, you significantly change the enrollment in a building, and if your goal is to have stable enrollment and also make sure that you are fully utilizing your facilities and making best use of the number of certified or endorsed staff that you have. We did look at that time at should we change the location of any of the cluster sites, or should we create new neighborhood sites? And the recommendation just came. And then the piece about, okay, how do you decide which kids go where? It has had a lot to do with looking at how many kids you had in each boundary area, how much capacity you had at the chosen sites for the cluster sites, and what made the most sense in terms of balancing enrollments between the buildings.
In your tenure on the board, and maybe to someone in the district that knows this answer, how often do we, as a matter of course, review that to make sure we're getting it right?
I would say the last time we had a real serious discussion about it would have been when we changed the elementary boundaries 5 years ago. But obviously, the boundary committee is a standing board committee and meets at least once a year to review enrollment information and take recommendations from staff. It's been a couple of years since I've been on the boundary committee, but I know that the last time I was on it, we did not. Staff did not bring a recommendation that they thought it was necessary to look at this.
That's helpful context. Thank you so much.
Thank you for shouldering the responsibility of that. I couldn't remember how we got there, but absolutely.
It's the function of being the old person on the board now, right?
You saved me. And I do just want to acknowledge, So by significantly changing any of the sites that feed into Hillcrest, it almost ceases to exist as a site. So we just have to think about, I mean, that's an interesting piece that we have to keep in mind and think about, but I do think it's always worth looking at again and thinking about how to best serve the kids, so. Shifting here, we just wanted to, I'm just gonna briefly go over this. This is when we say a student is in ESL services, what does it look like? At elementary, there's pushing in, so ESL resource teachers coming into the classroom, co-teaching, working with small groups, or sometimes pulling out. At middle school, it could be in guided studies. They have classes that are specific for ESOL. It can be general education supports with the teachers that are in the classroom, push in, and high school, the same thing. And on the right, if you see our CI3T or MTSS triangle, we're thinking about wanting to meet the needs of at least 80% of our students in Tier 1. When we're talking about pushing in and co-teaching and those gen ed supports that classroom teachers and content teachers are providing, that is Tier 1 for ESL students and all students. It's when we start pulling them out or we have them in specific classes that we're more targeted in the instruction that they're getting. Shifting to funding. So this just shows you at a glance what our bilingual and at-risk funding look like. So I'm going to walk you through these three funding sources. For ESOL, we get Title III funding from the federal government. It is typically around $60,000 or $65,000 a year. It funds our professional learning, and there's also a requirement from the federal government that we have a parent involvement facilitator at those elementary schools, so it funds that piece as well. We have state bilingual funding, which is funded to us by how many minutes we serve students the year before. That is what we use to pay salaries, to provide buildings with a budget of a couple $1,000s for them to buy their own resources, and that's how we pay for the ESOL endorsement and the licensure that we talked about earlier. But if you look on the right, on the chart, the lighter blue or the shorter blue is bilingual, and the taller blue is what we have to supplement from at-risk to actually be able to do those three things. Pay the salaries of all those certified teachers and paraeducators, to provide the buildings with a small budget for resource allocation, and to endorse and license the staff that we require to be endorsed and licensed. So we do have to supplement pretty heavily with at-risk dollars in order to be able to meet those needs, which are still pretty basic. We can't do everything, that we want to do, but those are definitely the things that we need and have to do. You notice there, I just acknowledged the jump in the monies in 2013-14. That is when we created the ESOL. At the time, we called it a learning coach position. Now it's the facilitator position that Casey's in. So that's kind of where that jump came in. So transportation. To our conversation earlier, we have a lot of students who are coming to us at elementary from non-ESOL sites. So when families are offered that for their child to attend one of the sites for services, we offer them busing at no cost to them. So if our ESL busing is about an average of $40,000-$45,000 a month that it costs us to bus those kids to the sites. But we do get reimbursement for the students who live, just like all of our other students that receive transportation. If they're 2.5 miles or over, we receive reimbursement from the state for their transportation. We do not do that if they're at the neighborhood site, Sunflower and Schwegler. They just go to their school as a neighborhood site like they would. So I'm going to just talk super quick, and then I'm going to hand this over to Casey to talk about the Kansas Seal of Biliteracy. So we're shifting a little, but this is super relevant. We have about 2 or 3 more slides for you. We want to walk you through what this is, the Kansas Seal of Biliteracy. Casey and a team of educators, teachers in our district have worked really, really hard to try and bring this to our schools. So excited to hear a little bit about what the Seal of Biliteracy is and how our students can access it and where we're at, because you have a vote coming up that could help us out. So we're going to let you know what that is. That sounded commercially too, didn't it? It's all good. I have it. Okay.
So the State Seal of Biliteracy is a seal that was introduced at the state level in 2017. And its first year, it had 10 participating districts and handed out over, or around 200 classifications. So a seal of biliteracy is essentially what it is a series of English proficiency and foreign language proficiency assessments, and if students can show their proficiency levels at both of them, depending on their proficiency level, they are either awarded a gold or a silver status after graduating. So this is something that can be acknowledged, but it isn't necessarily awarded until after students have graduated. And so the actual seal of biliteracy guidelines just were recently revised to be called gold and silver. Prior to that, they were gold and platinum. And so I was able to serve on the state committee, but since 2017, when that first came out, 2018, there were 16 participating districts, 2019, 23, and over 380 seals of biliteracy were granted in the state of Kansas. And so with the new round of the seal, with the new round of the seal, we looked at what kinds of qualifications would allow a student to show or demonstrate proficiency in English. And so, and we also tried to narrow down and be very specific, so we are isolating language. And so there are 9 assessments that a student can take to demonstrate proficiency in English. There are 15 world language assessments. Something else that we worked on the committee to have is a seal of biliteracy alternate assessment portfolio. So there are languages for which we don't have an assessment. If a student, and this happens a lot of time even with our Native American languages, there's not an assessment that you can say. So what we look at is we work with community members to establish a portfolio, and that student presents the portfolio and then is then awarded a gold or a silver, or hopefully, seal of biliteracy. It is something that's noted on the transcript, and something that we're working to see that if we can make it happen this year as well, when students walk across the aisle for those. So I know we have several students at Free State and Lawrence High that would hopefully qualify based on their AP scores when they take that assessment, because that's one of the qualifying assessments.
So what's super cool about this, and we're not doing it yet, and we need to be doing it, is that some of our students who are bilingual or multilingual can leave our system with a biliteracy seal. I don't want to call it a certification, but a seal saying, we confirm, we can tell you that this adult rather, is proficient in these languages. So if you imagine them going out into the workforce or even at the collegiate level doing something, but being able to certify, to say, I can do this. And how it connects and relates to our ESOL students is that oftentimes, and I'm going to use Spanish as an example, our students who are native Spanish speakers come to us and are fluent in Spanish and proficient in English. But so we have this thing, right? But maybe they aren't able to pass the actual Spanish assessment, one of the 15 that Casey was referring to, that are okay by the state. And it could be, so like a lot of what we experience is if our native Spanish speakers take Spanish 1, it's super easy. But if they were to take like advanced Spanish, it's significantly more challenging because the academic language is a lot higher. So what we're going to be proposing.
So what we've put forth is we actually did this twofold, because that was the second issue is, one, we can make this available to our students here in Lawrence, but then we also have to think about how are we creating equitable access to that, and what is that path? And then how are we also helping our ELs or our emerging bilinguals in our district to see the languages and the cultures they bring as an asset? Because that oftentimes is something that is kind of hidden, especially as they become more acculturated and within our culture and norms. So looking at the committee and I, when we put the Seal of Biliteracy proposal together, we are also putting forth a proposal to add Heritage Spanish at the high school level. I believe that is going to be brought forth before you at your next meeting. So hopefully, yes.
Vote yes? No, I don't know if we can say that, but it will be your responsibility to look at the recommendation and think about how you want to vote.
And I do need to give some serious props to the committee that helped me with it. And so we had several world language teachers from Lawrence High. So, oh my goodness, Amanda something, Williams at Free State, Stu Strecker at Free State, and then we had Rosina Geary over at Lawrence High, several ELL teachers, Rachel Driggers, and Sylvia Trevino-Mack also participated on the committee, and yeah, we got some letters of support. We garnered student interest, and so those are things that we did to help support that effort.
Yeah, so we're really excited about this opportunity, and should the Heritage Spanish class go forward, there's still a lot of work to be done on the part of the committee to make that happen, as well as being able to assess and send names to the state of students we believe should receive the seal of biliteracy. So fingers crossed, and we're hopeful that it's something we might be able to do for some students that are graduating this coming year, and continue to grow it from there. So. And Casey's done a lot of hard work on this, so I can't take any credit other than just having some knowledge about it.
There we go.
Oh, okay. We're going to talk about Project Insight, and then we're literally just going to walk you through the next steps, like what are we doing now, what are some of the challenges, and then if you have any additional questions. But Project Insight is a federal grant that K-State has that is allowing more teachers to get endorsed. Casey's going to tell us about it, but in Lawrence, we've had one cohort start, and we're getting ready to start our second cohort, and we have given priority to our teachers who are required to be endorsed first, but then next to that, middle school and high school teachers, because we want as many content teachers as we can at middle and high getting endorsed. So I'm going to let Casey talk a little bit about it.
So as Leah said, it's a federal grant, and we are currently starting our second cohort. We just had 25 people finish our first grant, and so we're very excited about that. They actually did what the picture you see up there is, I had the teachers come in and they served on a panel where we did kind of like speed dating of methods and strategies, and so they got to sit for about 5 to 10 minutes with different groups and rotate, and so
teach their colleagues who haven't been through the coursework.
Yeah, and provide examples and say, you know, I teach science, I teach math, I teach language arts, I teach band, because all of those areas existed in our first cohort as they do our second. The grant pays for 3 courses, and what I like about it, I've worked with several grants in the past, and taking on a grant is a lot of work. Like, it's constant coursework, and it can be very exhausting. And so oftentimes we would see teachers start to burn out towards the end of the grant process. And what I like about this grant is they do course on, so one semester of courses, maybe another, but then they take a break for a semester and they do application. So K-State then comes out and I work with them to set up appointments with teachers, continue that one-on-one conversation. Feedback that I've gotten from our first cohort participants are that the strategies have been incredibly helpful and that they are using them on a very regular basis. They have students that use them on their own. So they'll walk by and they'll see on a desk that a student's drawn a dots chart, and they're like, okay, here we go. They really like that. The other piece that they liked is there's a component where the coursework encourages you to work with colleagues from your building or colleagues nearby. And so just the relationships and the team building that they had done through that process was, I would say, nearly as meaningful as the course content that they learned. I am happy to say that with the second round of the grant, I petitioned K-State for more slots, and they granted us 5 additional slots. So we have 30 participants in our second round of the grant. It's starting on Thursday. So they'll be taking the ESOL methods course, and here we go for round 2.
It's super exciting. For us, it's really exciting because we're always looking for ways to try and get the teachers more of what they need. And the great thing about getting credit hours is it does things for salary enhancement. And I mean, there's a lot of benefit to what's happening for them and providing this opportunity. So what do we need to do? I'm just going to let all these go here. One thing that we're always working on, and I think you've heard it threaded throughout this presentation, is increasing the community and stakeholder knowledge about ESOL services and programming. So if you think back to the very beginning when I talked about just understanding how a student qualifies for services, that's a very basic thing that not everybody understands, right? It's not always just about Leah's first language being something different. It is about that exposure. And then the second sort of myth or misnomer is that it's a deficit, that bilingualism is somehow inherently you're going to struggle. And when we say provide supports, we're not always talking about struggling. And in some cases we are, just like with any student. But what we're talking about is good teaching. And like, people say this all the time, right? Like what you learn in your ESL coursework is like, oh, well, we do that kind of stuff all the time. Like this is just really great teaching. But the benefit of the ESL coursework and thinking specifically about our bilingual and multilingual students is being intentional about what you are doing for them. And that's what we're trying to teach. And those are sort of pieces of knowledge and understanding that we want to grow. So we keep working on our bilingual and multilingual literature, how we're marketing ourselves to families who come into the Welcome Center, if that makes sense, how we are providing the translation and interpretation services that they request and want and desire in the language that they need. And then moving to, and then we also have our culturally responsive teaching that we're utilizing with teachers that is absolutely applicable to this idea of growing and developing our understanding of students who are qualifying for these services. But professional learning for staff continues to be another area of growth and targeted, something that we target and think about and talk about. Casey and I meet weekly, and we're always talking about staff growth and how to grow it. And she's pushing me, do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. And I'm going, reel her back in. That's what's great about Casey, right? She's out there thinking of things. So what I want to focus on here is this idea of deepening our understanding of the language learning process. So the difference between social language and academic language. So if I'm on the playground and I'm chatting it up with Erica, and Paula, my teacher, hears me and she's like, oh my gosh, Leah can talk just fine. I hear her all the time. She's with her friends, she's running around, she's doing all these things. So the fact that she's struggling in science and math is not relevant to her language. That can sometimes be the narrative. And what we know about language development is that social language develops significantly faster than academic language. Academic language can take up to 7 to 10 years. So I can come across through my basic language skills as being fluent and proficient, but actually still need some additional supports, not because I don't know content and knowledge, but because language sometimes I'm processing differently, I'm receiving differently, I'm outputting differently. And that can be a cultural thing too, right? Not just language. So I was actually thinking, Shannon, you were there at the KASB presentation that Dr. Stubblefield, myself, and Sam Marie Devon did, where we did the photosynthesis thing, which is actually an ESL activity to help. So I just wanted, it'd be great if we could do it, but this isn't exactly the right environment, and you're probably already bored with us already. So, but I want to just give you a quick synopsis.
Yeah.
You're bored of me already?
No, I'm not bored.
Oh,
of you.
okay.
There's lots of those fun things.
Yeah, yeah. So, but the general idea, what we did with this group is we invited participants from the audience to come up and ask them to tell a chain story. So Paula would star a story. They decided on a topic. Maybe it was going to the carnival. You just start talking until I say shift or move or whatever, and then you pick up the story, and you pick up the story, and then you pick up the story. And as an audience, we just listened, right? And the language was flowing, and because they were all talking about something they decided on a topic. And then the next thing I did was went to that group and said, okay, I'm going to give you your topic this time. And I told them they had to talk about photosynthesis, but the caveat was that they couldn't use words that started with P, L, S, or T, like plant, light, sun, like all the important words. And the audience was asked to make a loud noise if they heard one of the participants using a word that started with P, L, S, or T, which significantly changed their ability to communicate and their level of anxiety around the communicating and their even willingness to do it at times. And what that really helps demonstrate is that they had the knowledge, they knew what photosynthesis was. We took away some of the things that would help them be successful, or we didn't give them things like a whiteboard and some markers or other ways to communicate to us the knowledge that they had. And so that, when we think about social language versus academic language, that is sort of the big picture of what we want walking in with our students to various classrooms, and that knowledge and understanding that how I show up might not be indicative of what I can actually do or what support might be useful for me in this setting. Does that make sense? So that was just really important for us to share that activity. Like I said, if we could have done it, it would have been great. But we want to shift to just allowing you to ask any additional questions, and thank you for your time. This is something that Casey and I are both passionate about, English as a second language, our programming, our teachers, and our students, and so we are happy to answer anything that you have.
I just want to comment, I think it's significant, that chart that you showed about the sources of funding and how, even though we think of, we get weightings, we get additional dollars for students who qualify as English language learners. This is the first time I've ever heard anybody talk about how the funds that are attached to that weighting are far from
Inadequate.
Yeah, or far from, I was going to say far from adequate, but inadequate, but they are inadequate to provide the services that are truly necessary for those students to be successful. So thank you for sharing that, and I will be using that information when I talk with folks about funding and weightings, and as we're having this conversation about the fallout from the at-risk audit results, because clearly that
Often that can be misinterpreted, because even I, as someone who's responsible for the budget, it took me years of Kathy telling me, Leah, you actually don't have enough money there. We have to take a bunch of money, but it took years. Where is she? She's not even, she knows, right? It took me a long time to even understand that the funding was inadequate and that we were not just borrowing a little, we were borrowing a lot.
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you for I can see your passion, both of you. And the information that you presented tonight was eye-opening for me as a new board member, and you gave a lot of context and background to what the numbers are. So I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for your passion.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Also, I want to thank Leah and Casey, and Casey mentioned it very briefly. She kind of breezed by it, but she did serve on the State Advisory Council for the Kansas Seal of Biliteracy, the revisions, and she was one of 26. So thank you for representing Lawrence Public Schools. But this seal definitely really will allow our students to really showcase their brilliance. And if you think about it, for the most part, students that may be bilingual or have the label ELL or ESL typically are looked at from a deficit lens. Okay, we have this label, but you're brilliant. You speak. I can't speak two
There's
languages,
neuroscience
right?
behind it. The
Right, exactly.
multilingualism, bilingualism, your brains
Exactly.
operate
There's a
in a
lot, yeah, it
significantly
is.
more
It is,
gifted
and
way.
so this seal will allow our scholars to leave us knowing I came in with a label of ELL, but I'm leaving with a seal.
Well, not only that, we'll be able to attract more educators who are going to promote this. Oh, I mean, this is a win.
So for students that do qualify for biliteracy seal, say a student was tracked speaking Navajo, for instance, and they were proficient both in academic and social language. So, but they were not tested for ESL language, but we know that they exist because of Native American Student Services, for
Seal of
instance.
biliteracy is for all students.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not
So
just
they
EL.
could still, they could absolutely still get the seal of biliteracy.
Okay.
We just wanted to make sure that what the committee and Casey wanted to make sure of was that our students who have a native language other than English, that they aren't left out of this opportunity to receive the seal of biliteracy, that we're finding ways to include them. So if your native language is something other than English, how can we help you show proficiency in your native language along with your proficiency in English versus the other students who are proficient in English and become proficient in another language, but English is their first language. So it's available to all and or students who have a native language other than English but do not receive ESL services. Yeah.
And it is worth noting that even students that are not English language learners, they also have to show proficiency in English. There are requirements for them to pass in English as well as the second or third language that they would like to earn their seal of biliteracy for.
So
And there are students that get multiple seals.
Great.
Sorry.
When we talk about the seal, and then you also mentioned the heritage language class, which is separate, correct?
Yes.
But it'll be part of.
So the way it works is when students enter and they come in, they enter as ELL students when they're in kinder, and if they stay with us through the course of their high school and all that fun career, most likely they will have exited ELL services, and they also will most likely have become very acculturated to U.S. culture. And what we find happens with that is while they may keep up that social language in Spanish, they don't have the academic. And so you'll see beautiful fluency. They are bored out of their minds and can even become behavior issues in a Spanish 1 or a German 1 class. But but they become very anxious and very nervous when you start putting text in front of them, when you start critiquing, I speak okay. So it can be very sensitive. And so having a heritage course where students with similar linguistic and cultural backgrounds can come together and just be like, oh, that's how you say it in Chihuahua. Well, I'm from Mexico City, and this is how we say it. And I'm from Chile, and this is how we say it. So it allows for different context and a safer place. And that's a lot of what ELL classes offer. I like to tell folks we serve 3 primary functions. We do language, we do access to grade level content, and we do home. Like a lot of ELL teachers are home for those kids. And looking at students that have potentially exited ELL services, this helps them get an academic path towards biliteracy. And so that's kind of the rationale and the purpose behind having that Heritage Spanish class. There are several other districts in the area that we've reached out to that also teach it, and I know that that is something that is been on the state's radar in terms of how do we help provide more support.
Yeah, it came up in conversation at the Equity Council, I think, correct? Were you at that meeting with me? Anyway, I'm glad to hear that you're working on it. I support it, and we look forward to voting for it, I guess, next time.
On the 27th?
Yeah, on the 27th. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much. Before we adjourn, just a reminder, if I'm right, this Thursday at 7 p.m. at LHS, student leaders will come and speak in regards to gun violence and from their narrative. We have January 23rd is our MLK One Dream with the gallery to start at 5 o'clock, and the presentation, award ceremony at 6:30. And we will have our next board meeting, as stated, Monday, June 27th at 6 p.m. Motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved.